Welcome, friends, to Biblical Musings. My name's Laredo Shannon, and I'll be your host today. We're going to look at least one more, what I'm entitled Adult Bible Stories. We've been looking at several. We looked at Jonah, we looked at creation, and we looked at some other things. But today I want to look at the flood in Genesis 6, 7, and 8. And we're not going to do all that today. I've been running a little longer than I intended. And we're going to try to shorten them a little bit, make them a little bit more manageable for those of you watching, if you're still watching. So the flood of Genesis 6, why is it an adult Bible story? Why are we entitling it that? Well, the flood is perhaps one of the most well-known Bible stories of all time. There's a few of these, what I would call the top 10 most known Bible stories. Creation, the flood, Jonah, and there's several others. Ones that people who maybe even never darkened the door of a church building know at least somewhat about, right? They can't have helped but see a Bible story kids book at Mardell's or something, or at Walmart even, or just in popular culture. Things that are just kind of out there. Things that have also, unfortunately, been relegated to stories we read our kids or grandkids in little cardboard books that are about 5 pages long with really pretty color pictures, but have very little relation to the significance that the Bible places on these stories. Because they're well known for a reason, because they're so significant. So it is our goal in looking at these again to explore, not in great detail, but maybe at greater depth, hopefully, what these stories contain that is so vital for us to learn today. Because when we look beyond the surface of the kids' storybook, I think you'll find that with most of these stories, if we've done our job correctly, there's much more adult meaning there than we're teaching our children. Maybe we should teach our children them as well, but that's another subject. So here we are in Genesis 6, and we get the beginning, the context, the setup for the flood which follows. So we're only a few chapters into the Bible by this point. This is the 6th chapter of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. And we've seen some genealogies, some not amazing reading, if you will. If you're interested in genealogies, I think you will be more if you study them, but not super good reading for the casual reader. But we've seen the creation. We've seen the fall of man in Genesis 3. We saw Cain and Abel in chapter 4, and then we saw the descendants of Seth primarily in chapter 5. And it got us down, the last verse of chapter 5 was verse 32, and it says, Noah was 500 years old, and Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And that's the last verse of chapter 5. And it's the last part of a long genealogy going all the way back to Adam, the 10 generations which come down to Noah. I believe it's 10. You can count them on your own. And it says in verse 1 of chapter 6, it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the earth. People start spreading out, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Now, what I'm going to read in just a moment has been turned into science fiction nearly. Most people read this and they take it into a 1,000 different ways, and it just needn't be so. It just needn't be so. A plain reading of the text is, I believe, called for, because anything else takes us to strange, weird places that the text does not go and never mentions again. And it does mention the plain meaning here, but we don't have time to do a deep dive. I mentioned that to say you can get to some really strange places with a few verses that follow. It is my opinion that the plain meaning of the text is the correct one. And what do I mean by plain meaning? Well, first off, we have to see what the text actually says, and then we can determine what it means. So often, unfortunately, people forget to take the first step. And then, of course, in the second step, you're very far off because you forgot to read what it says. So here we go. Here we go. I'll try and make this as simple as I can. Open your Bible because you need to see it in your own book. And I encourage you to get a reputable translation of your choice. I'm using the New American Standard. You should be able to use King James, New King James, ESV, NIV, a host of others. And I believe you should get the same meaning, slightly different wording, but the word order and the meaning of the word order should still be consistent. I checked as many as I dared before this video, and I found that to be the case. So here we go. The sons of God, verse 2, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Who are the sons of God? Well, in the previous chapter, we saw the generations or the genealogy of Seth, who was Adam's third son. He had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel, who was the righteous one. Cain was the evil one. And then Adam and Eve were in mourning, and they had another child named Seth. They had many other children, of course, but they're not listed because they're not important to the story. But when they had Seth, Seth became the father, the ancestor of those who would be more in tune to God. They would worship him. They would be the righteous line. And so when we get to Noah, he's the last descendant, if you will, of that righteous line, the ones who were tied back to that third child of Adam. Now, the sons of God in chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, appear to be the children of that line, right? The children who were worshiping God, the children who were of that heritage of faith, if you will. And so these sons of God see the daughters of men general, right? Of the people of the world, generally speaking. They're all related, obviously, just as we are today. But they saw some pretty girls out there and thought, we're going to marry those without regard, it appears. This is what my belief, what the text is telling us. It appears without regard to consideration what those pretty ladies' beliefs were. All right? And then God says in verse 3, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. Verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So what does that mean? Who are the Nephilim? The Nephilim have been very much debated, and this is not a class on the Nephilim. This is what I believe the text is clearly saying. There were Nephilim on the earth in those days, and there were Nephilim on the earth afterwards when these sons of God had kids with those pretty ladies of the world. All right, so whoever the Nephilim are, and different translations might say giants, might say mighty men, all things of that nature. But the gist of the story is the people who were righteous, the men who were righteous, got married to pretty girls who were not righteous necessarily, and they had kids with them. And their kids were mighty. They were strong. They were wise. We saw this, if you've studied Genesis, you'll have seen this back in chapter 4, that the children of Cain build cities. They discover metallurgy and metalwork. They become craftsmen and scholars, but they don't become godly. All right? And so we're seeing a similar thing here, is that they had children who were mighty. They had children who were strong. They had children who were these amazing men of renown, it says, mighty men of old. But what does it not say? It doesn't say any of them were sons of God. It doesn't say any of them were righteous. And the context that follows, I believe, bears that reading out. So that's my reading of the text. I encourage you to study it more, but believe me, there's some wild theories out there which have no basis in biblical literature or biblical teaching, in my opinion. But let's move on, because I didn't want that to be the focus of today's lesson. We've got a few more verses I want us to get to, because something truly incredible and not good incredible follows. Verse 5, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. Now, you can read that and move on by and say, wow, God was upset that mankind had been evil and he's going to get rid of them, right? And that's the gist of what just happened. But back off a second. Back off a second. Now, when God creates man in chapter 1 and in chapter 2, the retelling, he creates man in his own image. And he imparts to him, he breathes on him and gives him the spirit of life into his nostrils. He makes him a living soul, a living being, a creature into his own, I'm trying to think of the right word, but like unto God, unlike any of the other creatures. Now they have life, but they don't have the soul part. They're not made in the image of God, right? And it's that soul part, which is the image, right? What raises us above the animals, right? What makes us different, which makes us unique, what makes us conscious and aware. It also gives us the capability to create and also to destroy, right? And so God, not in this text, but in all the rest of the Bible, you see clearly, he thinks of his creation, specifically the men and women he's created, as his very own children. Adam himself is called the Son of God in Luke. He's the first created man, the child God made with the dust of the earth and breathed from his life the breath of life. And the children of Adam are also his children. They're the crowning achievement of his glorious, beautiful creation. He's going to say at the end of chapter 1 that after he made man and woman together, that it was very good. That his creation was not just good, because it was good before. He saw the light was good. He saw the trees were good. He saw the oceans and the skies, and those were good. But when he finished man and woman, when he finished mankind, he said, that's really good. That's very good. And when God, who is a perfect God, without fault, without a blemish of any kind, sees something and says, that's really good. That's really good. I love that which I have made. Now we come to chapter 6. And God sees that the wickedness of his children, replace man here with children, the wickedness of his children is great on the earth. And every intent of the thoughts of his children's mind was only evil continually. And this is the saddest verse maybe in the whole Bible. I don't know. And the Lord was sorry that he had made his children on the earth. Now think about this. If you have children, I have children. And if you don't have children, we'll just try and imagine, I suppose. Can you imagine getting to a place where a child of yours, a beloved, precious child, had so far deserted goodness, kindness, love, sense, truth, everything, and had so far gone into evil and destruction and hurt and lies and all of that you've said to yourself in your heart, I'm sorry I had that child. Because it's gotten so bad on the earth, and maybe we don't focus on this enough. It's gotten so bad on the earth that God says, I wish I hadn't made these children of mine. And so the understatement of the millennia is it says he was grieved in his heart. Heartbroken is what he is. He's heartbroken. And so he determines, he says, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land. I'm going to erase the children I have made. You see, when we think of the flood, we so often think of a little wooden boat with 2 elephants and 2 giraffes and 2 zebras' heads sticking out, and a jolly old Noah floating across the 7 seas and landed on a mountaintop with a rainbow around it, right? But what the flood is the most drastic destruction of our world that has ever seen. and ever will until the very end, until the final destruction. Because the flood changes the world forever, physically, but also genetically. We all trace our lineage to Noah and his sons because they're the only ones that got off the boat. Noah's, I'm assuming, probably had siblings. He probably had aunts and uncles and cousins and grandfathers and all of the rest. They all died in the flood. And we'll get there later. But I'm trying to get you to see, if you're willing, how incredibly dark and sad this story is. That God says, I'm going to have to wipe out, erase the children I have made from the face of the earth because they have gotten so evil that it is only evil continually. But there's verse 8. Thank goodness for us. The word but in the Bible, B-U-T, or however, might be the most precious word because it saves many a story and many of my heart many times. Verse 8. But Noah found favor or grace in the eyes of the Lord. But there was one man and his children. There was one. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Next week we'll look at Noah and the construction of the ark and perhaps the flood as well. We'll see how far we go. But this week I wanted you to think about, is the flood a kid's story, or is it a precursor to the final judgment when God punished the entire human race because they were so depraved and so sinful? And if you don't think that hurt God, then I encourage you to read this again. Grieved and broken to his heart. But he must bring justice and end the wickedness, or else the hurt will just continue. Because the children that are being born in this society are growing up to become just like the rest. And you think that doesn't hurt God's heart? I think it does. I think it does. So I hate to end on such a dark note, but thank you for joining me as we look together at the more adult themes in the flood story. Till next time, God bless.